Hello everyone, this is not your regularly scheduled Wednesday video. This Wednesday's video was supposed to be on the movie U571, and hopefully that video will still be released at some point in the future. Indeed, if you're watching this past the first week of release, maybe that video is out there now. Who knows? But in any case, of course, the wonderful automated systems on YouTube decided that any use of the film footage somehow violated copyright, even though obviously, fair use for criticism and review is a thing. Dispute is in. We will obviously see how it resolves. As I said, if you're watching this after the first week of release, you'll know how the dispute was resolved, but it means that for the moment, there is not a Wednesday video scheduled to come out, because the one that was scheduled to come out is currently blocked. Thus, this video. So this is the break glass in case of emergency Wednesday video, so you have something to listen to today. And today we're going to now look at some of the smaller incidents that occurred in the naval war between Britain and Germany in World War One. So everyone's heard about the Battle of Jutland. Most people have heard about things like the Battle of Dogger Bank, maybe the Battle of Heligoland Bight, the big flashy ones, bombardment of Scarborough, that kind of stuff. But what a lot of people don't realise is that there were a lot of smaller actions, fights between destroyer and cruiser formations, starting in 1914 and going all the way through pretty much to the end of the war. There's also obviously the false narrative that the High Seas Fleet never sails after Jutland. That's a completely separate issue, but the High Seas Fleet as a whole did sail after Jutland, and the High Seas Fleet in terms of individual elements definitely was active after Jutland, and it's one of those smaller actions we're going to look at today. Once again, we're going to be taking our account from the book Against All Odds, Battle at Sea 1591 to 1949 by Alexander McKee, which some of you who are regular viewers of the channel will know one or two other similar emergency videos have been taken from. And this one is detailing the actions of Evans of the Broke, that's a Royal Navy destroyer, in what's termed the Shoot and Scoot raids of April 1917. So let us begin. From boredom, bad food, and barracks-type discipline, the crews of the German battleships were to mutiny in 1918. But not the men of the cruisers and destroyers, who found themselves fully employed on warlike work. There were several British disasters to their convoys from the Shetlands to Norway, their escorting destroyers being sunk together with many of the merchantmen. But these battles took place far away. Much nearer home, and therefore much more newsworthy in England, was German destroyer activity in and around the Straits of Dover. The British supply routes for men and war material to the Western Front in France lay mainly through the ports on the Kentish coast, and there was the so-called Dover Barrage of nets and drifters and guard vessels designed to catch or destroy or deter U-boats from entering the channel from their bases on the Belgian coast. And there was the great storm weather anchorage off Dover called the Downs. All these offered tempting targets for the fast German destroyers to dash over during the night in what came to be called shoot and scoot operations. They were helped to success on occasion by alterations in their codes, which were hard for Room 40, the Admiralty Wireless Interception and Decoding Unit, to crack, added by much senior Admiralty indifference to the importance of their work. "Damn your decoding, why aren't you fighting?" was the motto of many. But Room 40 scored a success on the night of the 22nd to 23rd of January 1917, when the move of a German destroyer flotilla to Zeebrugge on the Belgian coast was detected in time and intercepted by a British force. On the 25th of February, the Germans obtained surprise but did little damage, and on the 17th to 18th of March, Room 40 gave timely warning of a destroyer raid, which was driven off. A much larger raid by a dozen German destroyers on the night of the 20th to the 21st of April was intercepted by a British force consisting of two exceptionally large British destroyers which may be classed as flotilla leaders. The result was to discourage the Germans for 10 months. After a British destroyer, the Paragon, had been sunk on the 23rd of March, the Admiralty formed a force of 4 flotilla leaders: Botha, Faulkner, Swift, and Broke. On this particular night, it was the last two which were on patrol. The Swift had a 6-inch gun forward, an enormous piece compared to the small destroyer, more worthy of a cruiser, and her captain was Commander A.M. Peck. Keeping station astern of her was the Broke, with a brand new bow. She'd lost the first one ramming another British destroyer at the Battle of Jutland, losing her captain at the same time. She was now to lose her bow a second time, but bring her captain fame. The Broke had been built by Vickers Armstrong in 1912 for the Chilean Navy and been requisitioned in 1914 for the British Navy. Her original name of Almirante Uribe had been changed to Broke after Philip Broke, captain of the frigate Shannon, when she took the American frigate Chesapeake in the north of Massachusetts Bay in 1813. She displaced 1,850 tons and had a crew of 214, including Royal Marines, an unheard-of thing in a destroyer at that period. In command was Edward Evans, who commented that she had beautiful accommodation for the captain and rotten quarters for everyone else. She was armed with 6 4-inch guns, 4 of them sighted to fire ahead, and 4 18-inch torpedo tubes. Evans had a father whose hobby was painting ships. He had entered the Navy the cheap way as a boy of 15 in January 1895, through the training ship Worcester, which prepared lads for the merchant marine, but from where cadetships to the Royal Navy might be obtained by promising youngsters. Evans was a small, tough lad who gained high marks for everything except good conduct, being classed as a ruffian. Becoming bored with life in the Royal Navy in peacetime, he volunteered for the polar expeditions then being conducted under Scott, Shackleton and others, and took part in 3 of them, gaining material for a book of adventures. It was whilst lecturing on his 3 Antarctic expeditions that he met Elsa Andvord at Christiania in Norway. This would not have been popular in the British Navy at any time for obvious reasons, so Evans was commanded to report to the Admiralty, where he was told that their lordships did not like naval officers contracting marriages with foreigners in wartime. Evans, however, told Admiral Sir Reginald Hall, the head of Room 40, "I don't care if she's a Hottentot, I'm going to marry her." Hall told Evans that he was impudent, but he may have told him a good deal more, for on the night of the 20th of April 1917 his biographer noted that Evans said he had passed word around about an expected German raid, blaming an extraordinary instinct. To his wife he said, "The Germans will come out tonight, we're ready for them." Evans had previously told his crew what his tactics would be in a night action: to strike direct for the enemy after firing the first torpedo, and to drive right in among them, ramming or being rammed, as the case may be. Of course, it was not a good idea to be rammed, but quite likely because of the high-speed night action, if you missed the ship you tried to ram, the next astern of her would probably ram you, and if you missed ahead, you would also be the one to be rammed. If Room 40 were right, they were in for an exciting night. The Swift and the Broke left Dover for the 9th night in succession at 7:45 p.m, having loaded 233 tons of coal during the crew's rest period. At 45 minutes after midnight, 7 miles east of Dover, they sighted an enemy flotilla steaming fast towards them 600 yards away. The fire gongs sounded in the German ships and in the British, who were outnumbered, apparently, 6-2. Sub-Lieutenant Peck went onto the bridge. The German destroyers, whose gun flashes they had seen as they shelled Dover an hour earlier, could just be made out, passing swiftly down the starboard sides of the 2 British flotilla leaders. He says, "Simultaneously, Swift, ourselves, and the enemy opened fire, and a ripple of flame ran down their line as blinding flashes lit the dark night. A roar denoted Swift's mighty 6-inch gun firing." It was the great flash from that gun, firing from just forward of the bridge, which momentarily ruined Commander Peck's night vision at the critical moment when he was turning his ship to ram. He missed, but avoided being himself run down by a German. Then he turned onto a course parallel to the Germans and fired his torpedoes, going 25 knots. One of them seemed to hit. Of the 6 men around Broke's forward gun a few moments ago, only 2 were left, but they were still loading and firing. A ball of burning cordite landed on the bridge, lighting up the Broke and making her a target for concentrated fire. Lieutenant Max Depard The first officer picked out the second ship in the German line. As his torpedo sight came on, he fired and hit. But when he ordered the second tube to stand by, there was no answer. "See what's happening, sub," he said to Pep. When Pep reached the tube, he saw the torpedoman lying dead astride it, and amidships there was steam pouring from the ventilators. The main steam pipe had been carried away by a shell, and all the men there had met an agonizing death, scalded. Another exploding shell threw Pep against the ladder leading to the bridge, from where he could hear Evans giving orders to attack the third ship in the German line. "Stand by to ram. Hard over and ram, quartermaster." The impact, reflected Evans later, must have been a dreadful moment for those aboard. The German destroyer G-42. In the Broke's engine room, the artificers believed they had been torpedoed. Lieutenant Pep remembered, "The crash, when it came, was terrific. Straight into the enemy, the Broke cleaved her way. For a few moments, the doomed ship was carried alongside, then she slowly heeled over and sank underfoot. On our lower bridge, there was carnage. Only the quartermaster, leading seaman Rawlings, survived, grasping the wheel from a kneeling position because his back and legs were riddled with shrapnel. Now the midshipman, Giles, grasping a revolver in each hand, was preparing to lead a boarding party armed with cutlasses that were always kept in readiness, but he was knocked down by shrapnel over the eye. 3 Germans managed to crawl aboard over the stockless anchor, more ready to surrender than to show a fight. In this carnage, a shell splinter shattered the compass and struck the binnacle against which Evans was standing, a fragment cutting his tunic. Otherwise he was unharmed, and, taking no chances, he ordered the boarders to be thrown back into the sea, and then for the Broke to follow the Swift in her pursuit of the Germans. On being told that the loss of boiler feed water meant that the speed was cut by half, so that pursuit was impossible, he tried to close a disabled German destroyer which was stopped and burning some distance away. This was G-85, possibly the ship that had been torpedoed by the Swift. On her way, more drifting than steaming, the Broke with ruined bows passed German survivors in the water calling for help. Lieutenant Depard suggested lowering a boat, to which Evans replied, "We're not here to look after midnight bathers." To the desperate cries from the water of "Hilfe, Hilfe," the British sailors roared back, "Hospital ships, Lusitania." When they reached the burning, drifting G-85, cries of "Kamerad" came out of the smoke. Then the forward gun of the German ship opened fire, possibly because the gun crews had not heard an order to give in, or perhaps merely they did not agree with it. In any case, the British regarded this as rank treachery and fired back with rounds of 4-inch gunfire and a torpedo, taking no prisoners except a single man in a boat who came alongside. The seamen were at this point in favour of hanging him, according to Lieutenant Depard. The Broke, by now out of action, anchored near the mine barrage, when HMS Mentor turned up to offer help. Her sub-lieutenant recalls the Germans swimming in the water and Evans leaning over the bridge shouting, "Remember the Lusitania," which may have been an injunction to the men not to save life. However, between them, the Swift and Broke rescued 140 Germans. The Swift had 1 man killed and 4 wounded. When the battered Broke was towed into Dover to roars of cheering and the wild noise of hooters, there were 21 flag-covered bodies on her upper deck and 27 wounded below in the sick bay. Evans, on visiting the seamen's mess deck, found scores of German sailors being fed with bacon and eggs by British sailors as if they were entertaining a visiting football team. Nelson would have approved, as per his quote, "May humanity after victory be the predominant feature of the British fleet." But not everyone can swiftly discard the ruthless determination to kill which is essential to the winning of battles. 2 days later, the dead were buried in a hillside cemetery above Dover. Evans then reflected, "How hateful war is. We who had come out unscathed were not unmindful of the poor relatives. Their drawn cheeks, dimmed eyes, and pale faces one cannot forget." A local court of inquiry arrived at the view that the total number of enemy vessels engaged was 5. We consider that 3 were sunk. The Admiralty commanding at Dover disagreed. 6 enemy engaged, but only 2 enemy sunk. Notoriously, high-speed actions at night are difficult to dissect. It's hard even for witnesses who remember everything that happened, let alone the order in which they occurred, or to be absolutely sure of all that they observed. Commander Peck, who was the senior officer and, according to Evans, the most modest man in the Royal Navy, gave Evans a glowing report. However, a naval member of the London Press Bureau came up with the title Evans of the Broke, which had a bold, dramatic ring to it, whereas Peck of the Swift would have sounded somewhat silly. A fellow destroyer captain recalled that this publicity made Evans unpopular with a certain group of officers who considered him a self-advertiser. What they did not realise was that to the newspapers he was news, and so Evan of the Broke it was. Evans of the Broke sounded the very man to choose as a liaison officer to go over to Queenstown in Southern Ireland to welcome the 1st Division of United States destroyers under Rear Admiral Sims to arrive in Europe. His style went down well with the Americans and also with the merchant seamen serving at Queenstown with Q, or mystery ships. By September 1917, he was the senior destroyer officer at Dover, Captain Peck having been given the command of a cruiser, an early assignment being to proceed to Calais, which in this war was still French and not German, to pick up a load of gold amounting to £5 million, consigned anonymously to the Bank of England. He was to load the gold on board the Broke and then wait for an escort. While at lunch, the quartermaster, in dripping wet oilskins, entered to say that there was somebody out there on the wharf asking for you, sir. There were indeed no less than 3 drenched figures trying to shelter simultaneously in a sentry box. In order of seniority, they were the Prime Minister, David Lloyd George, the Chief of the Imperial General Staff, Sir William Robertson, and the Secretary of the Cabinet, Sir Maurice Hankey. It appeared that they were queuing for the cross-channel steamer, so Evans offered them a lift on his own cross-channel steamer of the Grey Funnel Line. On being taken down to Evans' cabin, Lloyd George was startled to find the floor covered with little green bags containing gold. "Do you trust me with all this wealth?" he asked. "I suppose I shall have to say that I do, sir," replied Evans. The Broke made the crossing in rough seas, which made her appear more of a submarine than an outsized destroyer, but when Evans had seen his passengers safely packed away in a special train, as there was of course no queuing at Dover for them, he returned to his gold-laden cabin to find an agitated official of the Bank of England exclaiming, "We're 1 bag short." Evans laughed loudly. The bank official snapped that he was being too casual. Evans shrugged off responsibility on the grounds that it was many years since the Admiralty had abolished its kindly custom of paying a percentage to the captain of any bullion that he carried. Then, perhaps to plant a seed in fertile ground, he admitted that a man named George with a small attaché case had been in his cabin during the crossing. Before the Bank of England could try to arrest the Prime Minister, the bags were recounted and found to be correct. In October 1917, Evans was appointed flag captain to Admiral Bacon, who ran the Dover Patrol. Bacon was soon replaced by a more energetic figure, Roger Keyes, who had started the war as a Commodore of submarines, had played an enthusiastic part in urging decisive action at the Dardanelles, and was soon to plan what might be a decisive action against the U-boats now that the command was in his hands. But Keyes brought in his own staff and was thought to be a bit of a snob, and so Evans, who had joined via the Merchant Navy, had to go. He later became Lord Mount Evans, but Evans of the Broke was what he remained at heart. So there we have it. A short history of some of the more notable encounters of Evans of the Broke, with, of course, some insight into just what the mentality of various sailors was in this latter part of World War I when it came to conflict between the two navies. It is interesting to note how some of the British sailors, including Evans, appear to be incredibly ruthless to their German counterparts in the heat of action, but simultaneously, as we saw from the account, they seem to have been able to put that aside in the immediate aftermath in order to rescue the German sailors who were in the water as a result of their actions. So, with that, I will wrap up this emergency episode of the channel, and hope you're all having a great day, and hope to see you again in another video. Fingers crossed for the release of U571.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.